It's really great to be a part of this Scholars to Leaders series. Thanks to the School of Graduate and Postdoctoral Studies at Western University for having such a wonderful program. As I was making my remarks today for the talk, I remember more than 15 years ago, I'm wincing thinking about that, of going through a program similar to this and how valuable it was to my career development and professional development. And a shout out to my moderator, Alfred, for keeping us on track today. So before I jump in, I'd love to see by a raise of hands, how many of you are master students that are joining us? So you can just use your little hand icon and raise your hand. Excellent. All right, great. Okay, now I want to see how many doctoral students do we have that are taking coursework? Who's in here that's in that phase of trying to get through your coursework? All right, I see your hands, Aaron. Thank you, thank you. What about folks that are ABD? So your coursework is behind. You're gone through your comps are done, and now you're just in the research phase. All right. And then lastly, do we have any faculty joining us today? Okay. So it's really good to see we have a nice mix of folks in the audience today. I really excited to share with you just my experiences and my background. And as I thought about what I was going to share with you today, there were a couple of things that continue to resonate with me. And I think this quote by Jeanette Winterson encapsulates it best. The journey is not linear. It is spiral, with each turn bringing us closer to our destination, but also taking us back to where we started, so that we can see it with new and fresh eyes. So I hope that as you hear my story and my journey today, it empowers you to think about what your journey has been and where you hope your journey will go from here. So Alfred gave a really wonderful overview and introduction of who I am today, but I'd love to just spend a little bit more time because I really believe in building communities, and it's important for me to think about sharing a little bit about who I am before I jump into some of my other remarks. So as he mentioned, I'm Dr. Cristi Ford. I actually live in Maryland in the States, right near the US Capitol. As Alfred mentioned, I've worked in education for more than 2 decades. I mean, I feel like education in this profession is my first love. And my work has spanned the gamut. I have taught career readiness classes to high schoolers and colleagues, even fitness classes. When I was working on my PhD, I went and got a fitness certificate. I mean, I think for me, teaching and the opportunity to learn something new has really been a part of my DNA. And so for me, my love for learning and being an educator in some ways transcends all other parts of my identity. I've also served in roles like Associate Vice Provost, running a Center for Innovation and Teaching and Learning, looking at learning innovations, and I'll talk to you a little bit more about that. Or even being a Chief Academic Officer at Women's College in Kigali, Rwanda, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. I've traveled the world and worked on project teams in Africa, South America, and Asia. And then most recently, about 17 months ago, assumed this role at D2L as VP of Academic Affairs. I've spent more than 15 years in the online spaces, nonprofit, corporate, and I know I don't look a day over 22, so don't worry. I know I look young. But all of those roles have not been more important than being a parent of 2 very spirited young college students who have given me much of the gray hair that I cover with this color today. So as I talk about my experiences and share my background with you, I just want to give you a sense of who I am and what I bring to this conversation. So we have to start in the beginning in terms of where it all started for me. So I started out with this undergraduate and graduate degree in psychology. I mean, I've always been intellectually curious about the way people behave, the way people think, what influences cognitively people to do the things that they do. And so for me, getting a master's degree in IO psychology, coming out of the gate with a psychology undergraduate degree, my very first job was really, really critical for me. So I started out in K-12 working at a school at the time that was brand new, newly minted, a new high school in Maryland here, called a level 5 non-public, which just meant that we served individual disabilities of all spectrums. So we had students who had ADHD, ADD. I had a student, Wilson, who had selective mutism. I had students who had traumatic brain injury. And then, also students at the time that had autism, or high functioning autism, as it was known back in the late 90s. And as I started to spend time with these young people and thinking about what I wanted to do with my life and the kind of impact I wanted to have, I knew that I hit a glass ceiling. I had to go on and get a dissertation and move to get my PhD. And so I did that. I really, spent time really looking thoughtfully at doctoral programs and really trying to figure out what would be the best match for me. And similar to many of what you're doing in terms of figuring out your disciplines and your areas of expertise. But I remember working with these young people, just really wanting to have impact and change. And so, as Alfred mentioned, my PhD is in ed leadership and policy. But my emphasis was adult and continuing education, because when I was working with these young people who were leaving high school, I noticed, and this was back in 99, 2000, when we didn't know a lot about autism, there weren't a lot of options for my kiddos who wanted to be successful and go on to college. And so I spent time really cultivating a relationship with Dr. Barbara Townsend, my advisor, who was really well known in the field of community college research at the University of Missouri and Columbia. And she really helped me to figure out how could I create this co-disciplinary opportunity. So I had folks on my committee that were special education, that also had higher education background, to really look at, I created logic models at the time for support programs in higher ed for people with high functioning autism. So I went to 2 different sites, spent several weeks there, getting to understand the program, the intake, the kinds of support that they offered to students. And it was really, really fulfilling for me. And so as I moved along, I started to realize that my love for online learning and digital learning was really critical. Unfortunately, 3 weeks after I graduated, my advisor passed away. She had bile duct cancer and passed away early, and I didn't have that traditional sponsorship. So, when you leave your doctoral program, your advisor is the person that will connect you and help you to figure out this institution, or they have an opening assistant professor position. And I didn't have that anymore. I had some rough understanding, but I really thought about how my love of working with these kids with autism in 2000, how that translated in my love of breaking down barriers in online education being a catalyst for that. And so during my doctoral program, I had the opportunity to create a center for young adults with autism, where I work with individuals from across the state of Missouri that were really trying to figure out what was next for them as they aged out of K-12 and as they aged out of, secondary education. And because of that, I spent a lot of time just thinking about where might we be, I have opportunities in terms of digital learning. And so for many of you now that know, individuals who have autism, the social nuances are hard. The lack of organization is tough. So the online learning environment, reduced those social barriers. There were graphic organizers in terms of how content was organized, and it really helped the students to be successful. So after I finished my doctoral degree, and again, this is at the time when there wasn't a lot of funding around teenagers with autism. So there was a lot of money out there for youngsters, 3, 4, 5, early education around autism, but there wasn't a lot of funding. And so as much as I wanted to stay in the field of autism, there was no opportunity to be able to do so where I could really fund myself full time outside of some of the grant work I had been doing. And so I had an opportunity. The president of my undergraduate institution reached out to me and said, I've seen you've been doing some work with online. I'd love for you to come and help us start our online program here. So I started out as an inaugural dean of a undergraduate liberal arts education institution, where I helped them develop, over the course of my time there, 23 online learning degrees. So I worked with the dean of business, the dean of nursing, all different parts of the college. And I can just tell you, it was right time, right place. This was probably back in 2008, 2009. And while, the president had a great charge for online education, the resources were few. So I learned how to do soup to nuts, from enrollment management to faculty development. colleagues. I even built a call center. I went down and built a call center to be able to take inbound calls. So I spent a lot of time learning all areas of the business early when people were really trying to figure this out. This was before reciprocity agreements or federal requirements around online education, or our thoughtfulness around quality assurance. And so I really found that my love and thought around autism really led me into digital learning. And to this day, I credit those young people for the work that I'm doing today. And so my first thing for you is for you to hear from my story is that you need to really think about embracing diverse opportunities. Sometimes that linear academic path you're looking for might not happen for you. And so how can you align yourself and be ready to explore and discover diverse opportunities outside of your field of study? I think the importance of being open to unexpected opportunities. I had no idea that the president of the institution would call me and offer me this gift. Whether they are in different industries, interdisciplinary roles, or even unconventional career paths, I really found for me, this was something I had to really embrace. And I did this in online education at the time. And so as I thought about how to focus on those experiences, and as you think about maybe focus on those experiences, I want you to think about how you're going to use those experiences to enrich your skill sets, how you're going to broaden your perspectives, and contribute significantly to your own career growth. And so, as I mentioned to you, I did just that with my inaugural position at this small liberal arts college. And after being there for many years, I realized I really think I want to double down and learn more about this craft and spend more time understanding how I might be able to have impact and really be able to offer more leadership. So I left that institution, really small rural institution, moved to a really large urban city institution, spent time there becoming an accreditation evaluator. So learning to work with other institutions around distance learning, around digital learning at the time. And then moved on to UMGC, where I stayed for about 5 or 6 years and rose to the levels of associate vice provost. And I got an opportunity to do efficacy research, which for me was a joy, because being a doctoral student and being a doctoral candidate, you know the rigors of how to create really robust and thoughtful research questions. And so now I had a team of individuals that reported to me, where all that we did for the course of 5 years was create efficacy research around learning innovations. So I had Gates grants, I had opportunities to do adaptive learning pilots, I did nudging studies, I did all kinds of efficacy research to really find out, did these learning innovations make a difference for the students that we serve? And it really gave me a chance to hone my craft. I found that during this time, I started to expand my network. I was doing a lot more presenting, a lot more attendance of conferences. I was really kind of finding my tribe within my discipline, because I'd spent so much time in my doctoral program really becoming immersed in higher education associations, spending time with some of my old associations in psychology. This whole world of digital learning, I didn't have the wherewithal to understand all the nuance about the spaces. And so I really spent a lot of time embracing and expanding my network there. The next thing I'll say to you, so, as I share, kind of my journey, is that adaptability and continuous learning will take you far. I love this quote on the screen here, is that, it illustrates the significance of adaptability and continuous learning in navigating a non-traditional career path. You really need to be agile and flexible. You have to be willing to acquire new skill sets, adapt to a changing environment. And so as I started to do that and really embrace my willingness to take on new challenges and learning opportunities, it gave me the opportunity to pivot and excel in various roles. And so as I spent some time in that online learning space, I created an opportunity. I took on an opportunity in 2011 to be a part of a group called the Institute for Emerging Leaders in Online Learning Education that was hosted by the OLC. And it was a 4-month program. There were parts of it that were online and parts of it in person. And I'll never forget Dr. Mark Brown and Dr. David Lefevre being a part of those faculty for this professional development. Mark is from Dublin and David is from the UK. And hearing them talk about education internationally really sparked another interest for me. So I'm like, okay, I got this digital learning thing down, but I want to expand my reach and opportunity. So in late 2017, 2018 came an opportunity to interview for a role as chief academic officer of a women's college in Kigali, Rwanda. And I can tell you, when I talk about adaptability and really being able to continuously learn, it was a game changer for me to have those two pillars and skill sets in my back pocket. I'm going to give you one example of this. So in 2019, for instance, I was at this time the CAO of the Women's College. And if you don't know anything about East Africa, or people say Rwanda, but it's actually pronounced correctly Rwanda. If you don't know anything about Rwanda, it's a very forward-thinking and innovative country. So President Paul Kagame has really spent a lot of time rebuilding in the last 25 years since the genocide. And they had a lot of initiatives. So, students in secondary education had a one-to-one teaching initiative. So every child in formative education had access to their own laptop or some kind of equivalent device. And I was being brought to this new institution because they had all face-to-face programs, and then they wanted to move them to a blended modality. And given my background, I was up for the charge. And so I can't just imagine this. We had 1,000 young women in this program, and they were coming from all parts of the country, all rural parts of the country. And we were working really closely with the country's accrediting body because they were really eager to see what we could do. They wanted to leverage our results and help other more rural parts of the country. So the first thing we did was obviously create a digital literacy class, right? Making sure that our current young women and our future incoming students would be able to hit the ground running once we unveiled this new blended program. But we hit our first roadblock. And I thought, no problem, I can handle this. I mean, I was living in Kigali. I mean, this was a country and a city that had all the modern conveniences and infrastructure that was required. For instance, at night, I would get my food from Jumia, which is Jumia Foods, which is their version of DoorDash. And it seemed like we had everything we needed. So we got to work figuring out what we need to have put in place. And our first roadblock was around satellite access. We found that these young women did not have consistent internet access. This is something that I'd taken for granted being in the US and really working and building in these areas. And so we said, okay, no problem. We'll really spend some time building out our program and making sure that we're thinking about how we can make our rooftops accessible in terms of additional lounge spaces. So as we flip to this blended model, when girls were not in classes, they would have spaces to go up to 11 o'clock at night where they could still have access to the internet. I'm like, okay, so we're moving in the right direction. So as we're starting to move through, we have a learning management system, Brightspace, we're moving down this shift, and our IT department was in full motion. I mean, the one critical piece we were missing were laptops. And, in a country that is developing country, it's not like we could go to Best Buy and pick them up. And so we set off to find a locally sourced laptop company to work with us to supply our young women with locally sourced devices pretty early in this process. And my IT department researched everything. They felt really, really good about the distributor they had selected. And we felt so confident we gave the distributor a sizable deposit. Well, colleagues, with less than 3 months to launch the program, our distributor took our deposit and disappeared. And we couldn't believe it because in this part of the globe, unlike in areas in Canada or in the US, where there is federal funding and additional state dollars and provincial monies to help fund an institution, our institution was always supported by developmental dollars, fundraising. We were going out and fundraising with donors who were giving us these resources. So we didn't have a limitless supply of cash. So we still need these laptops, and we looked everywhere. I mean, time was running out. The live date was getting closer and closer, and we were coming up empty-handed. And we couldn't find laptops that didn't require us to go to the black market, which we did not want to do. So we said, okay, we'll go to plan B. We'll go to Dell, we'll appeal to their philanthropic side, we'll ask them to support our mission. Seeing these young women, they definitely will, reach out and be involved. It was a great idea, but the timeline, the red tape, it was going to take too long. So we moved to plan C. And we thought, okay, we'll find another institution in Rwanda that we can work with and have some kind of technology sharing program. But the egos, the politics between the institutions made it a dead end. And then just as we were about to give up, one of my colleagues suggested, what about a Kindle? And I thought, like, an e-reader Kindle, like, is it possible that Kindles can be used that way? And at the time, I didn't know they could, but they could. And I'm telling you, it was brilliant. It was the opportunity for my team and I. We were coming with bags and bags of Kindles. I had teams in Florida and DC, and we were buying as many Kindles as we could without Amazon flagging us for a business account. And we're coming from the US carrying these, bags of Kindles. And if you can just imagine the faces of the inspectors who see us coming in, and it took us a little convincing and several hours of making some phone calls, but finally we got through. But what that experience showed me in terms of my leadership, in terms of what I'm talking about, adaptability and continuous learning, is that, the power of growth mindset, innovation, and thinking outside the box. Like, you have to be adaptable and continuing to learn. And that was a huge part of the equation there. So the other thing I wanted to share with you is thinking about creating your own path for success. As I thought about my journey, and not having my advisor to guide me, I knew that my path would be non-traditional, and I knew I'd have the opportunity to connect with other senior leaders and share my knowledge and experience. And so as I've started to create my path here and moving into my role at D2L, it was a really great opportunity to take all of these great experiences and lessons that I've learned, and great research that I've done, and opportunities I've had to talk to people and to really collaborate. And this role gives me the opportunity to really be a thought leader. It gives me an opportunity to work with senior leaders at institutions that are on our platform, like yours, and really start to talk about what's best practice around teaching and learning in this space. So I've had the opportunity to carve out this unique path for myself. And it's been a windy path, but it's been a really great opportunity to leverage my expertise. And so as you think about your own journey, I just want to encourage you to embrace uncertainty. I encourage you to take calculated risk and forge your own career trajectories based on your strengths, your passions, and the evolving landscape of opportunities that are coming about in your respective fields. I mean, none of us knew that AI would have such a huge impact on our work 2 years ago, right? AI has been around for a while, but large language models has not. And so as you're creating on your own path, I just want you to approach your postdoctoral careers with adaptability, open-mindedness, and a proactive attitude towards diverse opportunities. And so that came for me before taking this job, because I was doing all this great work in East Africa, and then wham, the pandemic hit. And so I had to figure out, my family was here, my husband, my daughters were here in the States, how to come back home, and how, again, redefine myself. And so I moved into the nonprofit space and served as VP and then senior vice president of a training division. I had 90 individuals who worked with me to create training that was a Congress appropriated program for housing affordability across the country in the US. And so now I was in a different sector. And so I had to, again, acclimate. I had to, again, think about being adaptable, having open-mindedness, because I was really trying to move a different kind of individual. And so I really encourage you, as you start to create your own path to success, that I hope some of the things that I'm offering are resonating. So this is something I wanted to share with you all, because I think that all the things I've shared so far have really been about my journey and kind of giving some advice. But in 2021, when I was a part of a chief women's leadership group, this author, Dory Clark, wrote this book called The Long Game. And so as I read the book, I really started to think about how I could apply this to myself. And so as you're thinking about your future opportunities, I use this particular slide when I mentor up and coming leaders in the digital space. These were 6 components that she shared with me that I have absolutely taken advantage of. So the first one is social proofing. How can you find ways to increase your professional circle? One of the things I will tell people that get to know me, that in my entire career, I've applied for one job. And I think it's because my social network and the ways in which I've social proofed myself and really provided my opportunity to increase my networks has always been about someone talking to me or calling me, hey, we're doing this thing. From the job in East Africa to this job at D2L, it's always been about someone reaching over the aisle to me and saying, hey, I think this would be really good for you. So think about ways that you can do that for yourselves. The other thing is creating new content. How can you find ways? I think that we spend a lot of time as academicians, and specifically in doctoral and master's programs, thinking of publishing our work. But there's a lot of other ways you can take this great knowledge that you're creating and create new content. So what kind of superpower do you have? Is it something that you're able to determine how you can take that superpower and create new content? I do a lot. I have a podcast that I run called Teach and Learn, that I interview guests from all over the globe on just all kinds of curious educational components. Because of my intellectual curiosity, I'm always seeking and wanting to relate. So how can you create new content so that people start to look at you as an expert in your specific fields? The next two areas, invest in yourself, continue to learn. One of the things for me that was really critical when I started to do the work at efficacy research is I wanted to go get root cause analysis training. As I moved into senior leadership, I wanted to go get change management certification. I wanted to spend time understanding how to really do change management well. And so that's really critical for you to continue to think about that you are a lifelong learner. And if you're getting a doctoral degree, you are. If you're getting a master's degree, you are. And so the learning doesn't stop here. It's just a matter of the ways in which you consume the learning. The other thing I have on here is ask for what you want. So being really clear, if you're really good at something, being really clear about how you want to formulate what your life looks like. If you're not careful, when you're really good at a lot of things, people will carve out and create a career for you. So really start to sit with yourself and understand that even though you're good at things, for instance, I am a great grant writer, but I hate writing grants. I've written some really great big grants. I've been consulted to write $1 million plus grants, and I've gotten them for the institutions, the organizations, but it's not something I enjoy doing. So really figuring out how to formulate the picture of what you want for yourself and seek it out. The last two areas I would say is apply what you've learned. So again, I took maybe in 2019 or 2018 an adaptive leadership course. And in that, I have used some of those requirements, those skills that I've learned there to really be able to hone my skills. This last year, I wanted to be a keynoter. So I spent some time, found a TEDx speaker coach, really wanted to hone my craft around how can I be a really engaging and thoughtful keynoter. So, really apply what you've learned, seek out what you want to know, and then really figure out ways to apply it. And then the last thing I'll say is when you're on this journey, when you're in a doctoral program, I remember in my doctoral career, going out of track and running that track. And sometimes I would just come home and look at my little calendar. Okay, like I've taken these 4 courses. Next semester, I'm going to take these 3 courses. I had to take it one step at a time and really focus on the small wins. Okay, I made it to my comps. Okay, I've passed my comps. Now I've got my first chapter written. Because I think it's important that you don't get so far out that you get in your own way. So really trying to find ways to focus on the small wins, I think would be one of the things that I will offer you as you think about this. So I offer you to take a look at the book. I think it is if you can take a lens in terms of your own career, it's a really great read and may help you think about some things differently. So I know I'm almost at time before I turn it back over to Alfred, but one of the things that I wanted to share is I think that one of the things for me has been the best way to predict the future is to create it. I have a little necklace that says, from Mahatma Gandhi's quote, "Be the change you wish to see in the world." And if it's in East Africa, if it is in special education, working with kids with autism, if it's with working with clients and partners today, I'm always trying to find the ways where I can have the greatest amount of impact. And you can't be worried about taking the risk and making mistakes. One of the things I love about being in innovation and my leadership around innovation is I always tell my teams, we're going to fail forward. We're going to learn so much more from where we fail sometimes in the successes that we've had. So the journey, as I mentioned at the very beginning, it's not linear, but it's also not about getting to the destination. It's about the experiences that you're having right now the experiences you're going to have along the way that will help you to look back. As I prepared this talk for you all today, and just took a step back and thought about all the places where I've been, all the places where I've lived, all the kinds of industries and opportunities I've had, and I'm not done. I won't retire from D2L, but all the things that I have done, it's really been about the experiences, and sometimes the hardest experiences have been the greatest lessons for me. When I talked to you in the beginning about being at a small liberal arts college and having to do everything, I was working my butt off. I was working sun up to sundown. But there are still experiences now, today in 2023, that I can pull from all the things I learned during that time that make me a better leader, that make me a better strategic partner. And so sometimes, even if the experiences don't feel good, it's really critical that we take a moment and take a step back and really think about what we should be doing differently. So I'm going to turn it back over to Alfred. Thank you for my time today. I really hope that you found a little bit of inspiration in some of the things that I shared with you. And I'd love to answer any questions you might have.
Yeah, so thank you, Dr. Ford, for such an insightful talk. If you have any questions, any opinions you want to share, please, you can put them across either in the chat or you can unmute yourself and then ask your questions. So, Dr. Ford, as we are waiting for others to ask their questions, I have some few questions that I want to ask.
Okay.
You talked about your experience in Rwanda and when you were the head of the women's college. And so, how did you navigate those experiences? Especially, we talked about when you had no opportunity to work, get the laptops along for the project you wanted to undertake. How did you handle that with the tenders and all those things? How specifically did you do that?
Yeah, Alfred, it was a challenge for sure. It was also very humbling. I had gotten to a point in the US system where I was leaving a job as associate vice provost, and I knew all the players in the digital learning spaces. And now I'm moving over to East Africa, and I was starting all over again. I'll give you one example. In US curriculum, we don't focus on UNESCO sustainability goals, but in East Africa, we did. And so I had to really start to think about the ways in which I had to upskill myself in this new cultural context, and really making sure that I was really thoughtful about the students that I was serving, really thoughtful about the region I was in. I had most of my faculty came from either Uganda, Kenya, or Rwanda. And so I had this really interesting mix of faculty. And so it was really about just having ingenuity, sometimes taking time to listen. Even though I was a CAO and everyone was always asking me for the answers, I also started to look at what my unofficial leaders were on the campus. And so starting to position people where I saw they had potential. I'll never forget a colleague of mine, Dr. I'm sorry, not a doctor yet, but Paul Swaga. When I came in, he was the head of the writing department. And I saw he had so much strategy and so much thoughtfulness that I made him the co-head of the whole institution. And before he left, he ended up being the president of the institution before he moved on to a new gig. So I realized I also had to know that I was only as smart as a team I put together, that I couldn't do it all myself. And I had to really also foster and engage and really encourage other people's professional growth if we were going to all kind of get through this together. So it was a really privileged time. I really hope that I have an opportunity to do more work, which is why I love in this role my opportunity to work with our colleagues in Singapore and Australia and the UK. I really appreciate the opportunity to think about global education and the ways in which digital learning can be a catalyst in all of those different parts of the globe. So that was a long answer, but it was tough, but it was very rewarding. Oh, Alfred, I think you're on mute.
There's a question that's addressed to Julia, but my next question is, I am a PhD student pursuing leadership studies, just like yourself. And for us, we are so much enthused about policies. So, what are some of how do these policies inform these unconventional methods that we can adopt to pursue these postdoctorate degrees?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, as you talked about, policy is in the description of my doctoral degree as well. I really appreciate it. I was never a policy person before I went and got my doctoral degree. I was just an educator, and what will tell you is I hearken back to some of those early courses around policy development, around policy analysis. And for us here in the US, when I started in online education, there were very few policies and regulations around what we call instructor presence or regular substitute interaction, or think about physical presence. And so as those started to come up from the US Department of Education and Dear Colleague letters were written, and I really got to think back on my training and how my training informed the procedures I put in place, the ways in which I created strategy and vision for the organizations. And so I'm really grateful. I didn't realize at the time, but I'm really, really grateful for the policy analysis part of my doctoral degree and really helping me to be thoughtful about the bigger picture. I think the other thing I will say is also, I really try to do a good job of helping people to understand how to break policies down and how to make them applicable for you in terms of when you're thinking about what needs to happen in an institution. Regular and substantive interaction is a big political piece here in the US around how often you're engaging with students in an online and digital learning space. And so there's some parameters in terms of procedures that need to be put in place. And so I'm always trying to use some of my policy analysis expertise and my learnings through my doctoral program to be able to help others as well.
Great, great answers. Now, my next premise, as graduate students, we deal a lot of stress from the research, the work we do. For some of us, like myself, my family is not here with me in London, Ontario. So you could see the lot of stress that we go through. How can a graduate student handle stress resulting from some of these things as we pursue our courses and programs?
That's a great question. And I think for me, the first thing I would say is no matter where you're coming from, it's about community. For me, when I went to my doctoral program, I left a full thriving career. I quit my job and went back and got my doctorate degree full time. I was used to making money and having, all the luxuries of having a job and then going to be a doc student. And that TA salary just didn't quite measure up. And I moved across the country. So I never lived in Missouri before. I'd never been in the Midwest before. And quite honestly, there were places where I was one of very few Black students in the program. So for me, in terms of you talking about the stress, I think it's about belonging, finding communities that support you, finding communities where you can be of support to other folks. And then where can you, I know that, doctoral research and research, if you're doing for your advisors, is consuming, writing lit reviews. I mean, it's a lot of cognitive load, but where can you have other outlets? It was for me why I started teaching fitness classes. That was my outlet. I got an opportunity to move my body, to kind of take my mind off of some of the cognitive pieces that I was working on. And so if it's not teaching a class, if it's playing basketball, whatever it might be, really finding ways to balance yourselves. Because let me tell you this, I am talking to colleagues who have been in the field 20, 30, and 40 years. I just completed a self-care survey with senior leaders, including presidents and vice presidents, around burnout and around self-care. And the research shows that self-care, if you are really clear about what self-care means to you, creating boundaries in your workspace, being able to find ways to be able to decompress, it makes you a better leader. The National Institute of Health, the NIH here in the United States, has done some really great research around leadership and self-care and the combination of two. So if you can learn those habits now, find ways to be able to have outlets for yourself, even if it's for 45 minutes. I mean, you really need to try to find ways to create those communities and then making sure that you're thinking well of yourself when you can.
Wonderful, fantastic. So my next question is, I don't know if there's anyone who also wants to ask a question. I don't know whether I'm asking all the questions. If there is anyone here, you can also please unmute and ask your questions or put it in the chat.
I think there's one question, Alfred, in the Q&A. Oh, but it's for Julie, so we don't
Yes,
need to.
for Julie. Yes,
Okay.
it's for Julie. So maybe I can do my next question. And what I've observed is that there are instances where the traditional route has gotten people that belong to the major ethnic groups. I'm talking about the whites, the privileged males, and all that. So for females, for other people of color, other equity-seeking groups, how do they navigate this trajectory to be able to create that future that they want in this terrain?
Yeah, it's a great question. You know, Alfred, when I joined D2L a year and a half ago, one of the things I put in place was I co-sponsored a group called Women in Action. Because what I found at D2L was I wanted to make sure that women leaders were having opportunities for advancement and having safe spaces and opportunities to create mentorship. I think when you talk about people on the fringes or folks that are historically marginalized, you really got to find good sponsorship. You got to find good mentorship in terms of those that are at the table that really understand. I talk about this a lot with my colleagues, in that really, when you talk about diversity, if you talk about inclusion, it's really about making sure that everyone has a seat at the table. And going a step further, that sometimes means that that person who is sponsoring you needs to give their seat up so you can sit down. And so I think it's really critical that you find mentors and sponsors. It does not have to be your advisor. Your advisor is critical to get you through the dissertation and the academic journey. But there may be other folks that you're working on research with, or other people that you're connected to, or that you have a like-minded interest around, where they see your potential and your opportunities. Like, you should double down. Don't be afraid to talk to those individuals and say, here are the things I'm thinking about. I would love your input. More often than not, the folks that I have a little mentee cohort I've created over the years, that now I get my mentors together so they can talk amongst each other. It shouldn't just be about me mentoring them, but how can you find ways to get engaged? Because I'm telling you, if you continue to sit on the sidelines, this work doesn't change. And I will just have a moment of transparency in the digital learning space. As I look at the work that I've done for the last 20 years, there are not many women, Black women of color in leadership positions that have done the gamut of what I've done. And so I'm always trying to find ways to step out of a seat and give that seat up for someone else, because really the inclusivity of having multiple voices, multiple intellectual perspectives really makes us all better. But you do have to get up and get in the game. You know, reading that book, Dory Clark, would be a fantastic opportunity, and find ways to get sponsorship or mentorship.
Good. So, Christy, there's a question in the chat, in the Q&A.
Okay.
Throughout your academic journey, how were you able to source a mentor or sponsor to support you and help with opening other opportunities?
Yeah,
And the
that's a
second
great.
part of the question is, what would you suggest for doctoral candidates now?
That's a great question. Thank you for asking that. So one of the things I said on that one slide about future-proofing your career, you know, if we had the time, I would really want you to reflect on, what is your superpower? So for me, part of my superpower is I am very relatable. I find I make friends very easily. I'm very intellectually curious about what people are doing. I want to learn and understand more. And I find that it helped me a lot as a doctoral student, because faculty love talking about themselves and their research all the time. So I found that the kinds of mentors and support that I got came from having a class and then stopping after class and saying, you know, I'd really like to understand more about X, Y, and Z, or I'd really love to know if there's something I can do to support you in this way. I always framed it in, you know, I'd really love to find ways to support your leadership around X. And I just kind of went with him. So for me in my department, besides my advisor, there was a woman by the name of Dr. Juanita Simmons, who really focused more on K-12 research, but she saw an interest in me, and we spent a lot of time. I helped her, in her digital learning spaces to get acclimated to teaching online and to help her to be able to set up some of her work. And so if you can find those ways, at the end of the day, we're all human beings that are looking for connection. So if you can kind of find ways to come outside of yourself, and maybe, connecting with people is tough for you. And if that is the case, can it be about the research? Can it be about a passion or a hobby project that they're working on? I think about sometimes seeing on the bulletin boards, I may be dating myself, but bulletin boards in my department, like a request for research studies. And I, take a little thing and go learn more about it. But always trying to determine what I could do. When I started at my doctoral program, I went and met with the graduate dean. I just said, hey, I want you to know I'm here. I'd like to know who you are. I see that, but in her instance, Dr. Margaret Grogan at the time, she was also teaching one class a semester, I think, in our program. And so I just said, I know you're a program faculty. And making that connection helped me get more research support and funding. It was just about people want to understand how they can help and support your journey, but you have to kind of open up. It's something I try to teach. It sounds so dated, but I try to teach some of the folks who are coming up in the millennial generation that sometimes it's not, as much as I love digital learning, sometimes it's not about this. It's really about making those connections with people. But I'll tell you, people love talking about their research. So if there is an opportunity to lean into that, even if it's not an area of interest for you, or if you see someone who is just overly thoughtful of you, who is overly interested in your development and growth, like, can you lean into that where they could be a source of support? Because many of you are going to need recommendation letters. If it's a specialized program you want to do in the summer, you need those allies in your corner, starting from way before you finish your doctoral degree. So start developing those now.
Okay, I don't see any other questions. So I would thank you very much. And then for those students who are here, we can take it on from what we've heard from Dr. Ford. We need to embrace our capabilities, be adaptable. And I'm happy to share with you that yesterday, my team, myself, we won the best pitch for the graduate student innovation
Oh, that's
program
great.
by Western World Discoveries.
Oh, that's
And so that
fantastic.
is one of those things Dr. Ford is talking about, be adaptable.
Yes.
Don't stay in one corner and say, because I'm a PhD student in educational leadership, I'll not go for something related to business. It all opens up your mind and helps you to think more about whatever you are doing. So we appreciate you and thank you very much. So at this time, I will hand over to Julia to also take over.
Thank you, Alfred. It was such a pleasure to have you moderate. And again, congratulations on doing just what I talked about. So congrats to you on that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alfred. Thank you, Dr. Ford. We do have one more, if you have a couple more minutes, there was one more question that just popped up in the Q&A, if that's okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So one of our participants asked that EDI or DEI initiatives are the biggest challenges for organizations now post George Floyd. How can I, this is the participant, as a woman of color, apply my academic skill set when meeting for an interview to demonstrate that I can commit to the role based on the employer's needs?
That's a really great question. I would argue, I have a lot of thoughts on this, and I will offer them as succinctly as I can, but I will argue that pre-George Floyd, DEI has been a challenge. In the States, we have had legislative challenges in the last year that have made it difficult. They're starting to remove the history of slavery from textbooks and curriculums. You can't talk about critical race theory. You can't, there's certain things that you're not able to say. I think in terms of your ability to understand what an employer needs and to double down, I think focus on the skills you have, focus on the opportunities that you can bring something different. I think it did take me a long time in my career. I think I'm at that point now that, for instance, when I took the role at D2L, my predecessor was a white male, and I was really clear that my leadership will look different. And if you're looking for more of what Jeff offered, you shouldn't hire me because I'm going to come in and fully be myself. But again, that's been after years and years of experiences to be able to have that. But I think if you can focus in and think about from an asset-based approach, what you bring uniquely to the experience, to the role, to the employer, as an asset, and really elevating that asset, and really thinking about the fit and really trying to figure out the ways in which you can make an opportunity. And I will also say to you, there have been times when everything has not been a fit for me. And I've been grateful that I have not tried to push the envelope in spaces where I was not welcomed in ways that were going to make it just traumatic for me. So I mean, it's a balancing act, right? Like in terms of where do you push and kick in, and where do you really double down, and where do you realize that control is an illusion, and release it with grace and find places where you're going to be elevated and supported. So I think that would be the best way that I would respond to that.
Thank you so much for taking that
Absolutely.
final question. And we have some participants in the chat who are just saying thank you and acknowledging what an inspirational talk this was, which I have to agree with. I really appreciate all of your messages about your being proactive in your career, embracing that uncertainty, and being willing to take on new risks and challenges. And your career exemplifies how the willingness and openness to do this can lead to new opportunities and success. So thank you so much for sharing that experience and messages with our students. And
Absolutely.
thanks to everyone for joining us today. I hope you've taken away some important insight for your own career, and hope to see you at a future event. Yeah, we have some emojis there saying how celebrating the talk. So thank you again.
Thank you all. Great to have the time with you today. Take care.